Okay, good morning. Shall we start? People are still arriving, but let's focus on our time. And after that, it's going to be another session, so we need to respect the time for all the other participants as well. So, good morning, everyone, online and offline. My name is Daphne Iglesias, and I'm part of the policy team of the International Rescue Committee. I'm based in Germany, and our team is focused on livelihoods and financial inclusion. Today, along with a few of our partners, I will guide you through a journey that was planned to assist the enduring journeys of refugees, providing them agency, dignity, and a sustainable living. So I'm going to talk about the roadmap to the sustainable and responsible financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons. This was firstly published in 2019 at the Global Refugee Forum, late 2019, so you might guess that we had problems because of COVID, obviously. And actually, we were here in the last in-person European Microfinance Week, also presenting the roadmap. And the roadmap was promoted by a coalition of partners led by the government of Germany via its Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and also his supporting agencies like GIZ. So members have agreed to collaborate and cooperate in influencing policy and implementing recommendations for better financial services to the displaced persons, along with the host countries. So if one group can benefit from that, why not all the other ones? The German government has invited IRC to support turning this coalition of partners into an active community of practice and develop its activities. I take this time now to acknowledge the representatives of our partners that are here in the audience, that are following us online, and that will also be here up in a moment. Thank you for your support throughout the years. We are going through times in which human displacement has reached unimaginable figures. War, food insecurity, and climate change have displaced more than 100 million people. The Roadmap Network adds up to the existing initiatives by bridging the gap between humanitarian aid and development for economic well-being. To do so, this community of practice was set up as a safe space in which the network partners can exchange challenges on policy implementation, share good practices, talk about their challenges, and strengthen the coalition ahead of what is coming. We need to be prepared. You can see from the slide here that how each economic, social activity interacts with one another. And as such, which is a really common reality today, we are not monoliths. We cannot work national strategies without thinking of how financial supporters like financial startups these days and telecom companies can also assist us in providing and including people in the financial world. This is just one small example. So, but before there was this roadmap, before there was a community, there was the roadmap. And before the roadmap came to be, many organizations were involved in analyzing research, data, and the needs for forcibly displaced persons, and also testing solutions on the ground. So today, we will introduce you to 4 of these partners, and we will then talk and see what they have done to implement the roadmap and also helping each other on the circle of partners to do better actions. So I invite now my colleague Yunus Hamed, Senior Technical Policy Expert from the International Labour Organization, to join the stage. My colleague Marianne Jamila Zahari, Policy Analyst from the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. And last but not least, my IRC colleague based in Belgium, Anneline Vos, Senior Policy Officer for Economic Programs. We also have a partner that is joining remotely from Jordan. We have our colleague, Mr. Matthias Poza. I'm not sure if we can show him on the screen, but he's there. Hi, Matthias. We really welcome that you're here. Thank you so much. And thank you all also for being here for this session. I know it's very early, and yesterday was a very busy day. So before we start this journey, and I hand over the microphone to my colleagues, I'll also let you know some operational remarks. So we have our other colleague, Konstantin Pagonas from GIZ, that he will be here with me, will be our online moderator. If you are in the online audience, you can send questions during the presentation. He will collect some of these, and then we can answer some of these live. If you are in the room, we will hand out the microphone. And I really ask you that you can be direct with the questions again because of timing issues. And then we can have a lively discussion and let as many participants join this discussion as possible. Our speakers will also observe this time. They have maximum 10 minutes to explore their topic. And as there is never a polite way to interrupt someone, I will give them cues when they have to reach their limit. It will be a bell ring. So please, don't worry. It's not a fire alarm. It's just a bell ring for them to understand that they have almost reached their participation. You're going to hear the bell ring twice. But if you hear something else, please run, because then it's really a fire alarm. So we have to make sure that everything is set up. All right, so now we start our presentation with our dear Ursula and her policy intervention model from the International Labour Organization. Ursula, the floor is yours.
And this, thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Yusra Hamid. I'm a financial senior technical expert at the ILO, and I work mostly on refugees, crisis situations, access to finance in these situations. So today I'll share with you the intervention model of the ILO, and I try as much as possible to give you examples, but please come back in case anything is not clear, come back in the questions. So basically, this is when we start working in a country, this is really how it looks, and the intervention that we do, how it looks. We work at the policy level, we work with the supply and with the demand, with the final aim being to make refugees and host community access sustainably in a responsible way adequate financial services. So at the policy level, we work with national government, we work with the financial regulators, but also being the ILO, we work with the constituents, with the constituency, which are the trade unions and the employers' organization. And when it comes to jobs and to employment, they can really be powerful in helping us in the advocacy. We also work with the supply side, so the financial service providers through training and technical assistance, and I'll come back to that in a minute. We also work with the demand side, so the forcibly displaced population and the host communities through building their capacities in financial education, but also in entrepreneurship and helping them to be able to build a business. So the final aim is really to make the supply and the demand side meet and to narrow the gap between these two. So, policy level support. Our objective is really to ensure through advocacy that refugees and host communities that are not included from the financial sector, and that they are using, not only accessing, but also using the financial services. So research is really trying to understand our market and trying to understand what is happening is a first step. In many countries, there are really great research that we can use, but in some countries, like for example in Iraq, where we are working now, or in Sudan, it is not very clear what is happening in the financial market globally for everyone, and not to mention specifically for refugees. So really we start with research for us, but also for the partners, and we use it for the policy level partners, but also for the supply side partners to understand the market. So we use it for national advocacy, but also as we are part of the roadmap, and we are also, we submitted pledges to UN, to higher level international forums, also to join forces with other international organizations in the international advocacy. On the supply side support, so as I was mentioning, we are building the capacity of financial service providers through a training that we call Making Finance Work for Refugees, IDPs, and Host Communities. It is a 5 days training that is addressed to managers and middle managers of FSPs, of financial service providers, to really help them understand this market, realize that actually there is a market, target this market, and provide services specifically to this market of refugees and host communities. So we start with strengthening their knowledge on the demand and supply of financial services of refugees and host communities, hence the research I mentioned before. Address key barriers to increase the financial inclusion among refugees and host communities, and also debunk all the myths. There is a big part of the training about the myth of providing financial services to refugees. They will flee, they are here just passing by, we will never see our money back, and all of these things. Target and identify the attractive refugee market segment. Okay, not every refugee is eligible and would have good use, actually. Sometimes we all agree that sometimes by providing them financial services, loans mostly, we can put them in a harmful situation. And then one of the outputs of this training, it's very hands-on, very practical, is to design a strategy to expand outreach to that market segment. Of course, there is that much you can do in 5 days, but at least FSPs, they go out of the training with something, with a plan. And we help them to identify the pathway internally also, because many times the managers or the middle managers that we have, they need to convince higher up of the importance and that there is a market, and refugees, host communities, it is a market for them. So we identify for them a pathway how to build a successful business model with this segment. But as I was mentioning, there is so much that you can do in 5 days training. You would not change knowledge, attitude, and behavior in 5 days. So we complement this training with technical assistance. So for the institutions that are really serious about getting into the market and that ask us and want to do so, we provide them with technical assistance. So why? Because for most FSPs, it is a relatively new segment. Even the ones with whom we have been working and that are already working with refugees, they are doing it very, very light touch. It's not really, they don't identify it as a segment, they don't see it as a business for them that can be sustained and done on a sustainable way. Again, a lot of myths, it is deemed highly risky, and if you are able to change the mind of one person, you need to change the mind of the whole institution so that it is effective and it is done. So there is not only one service required. Of course, you need to understand, again, what we were talking about this yesterday, you need to understand the needs of the customer. We sometimes just go, oh yeah, they all need loans. No, perhaps not. Perhaps they just need payment services, or perhaps they need just savings. So just understanding really the market and being able to say, okay, we will design something new. So it is, of course, pushing the frontiers of financial inclusion. And usually FSPs, they are under pressure when they start getting into this new segment. They are under pressure internally and externally. There is a huge resistance internally, for example, from the staff, because as loan officers and many of the staff of FSPs, their incentives and their salaries, they are linked to the quality of the portfolio. And because they think that portfolio will be, this population will need to reimburse, then I will be personally impacted. So there is a lot of resistance there, but also a lot of resistance from clients. So why have we been faithful? We have been here for ages. Why these people, they're just coming now and you are serving them on the same grounds as us? So there is a lot of pressure for the FSP on this side. So the training would lay the basic framework, and the TA will really take the FSP by the hand in applying the training. So the main 4 components of the TA is, the first one is the market research. So we do it together with the institution. We aim at building their capacity. So we have a team from the institution going together with us to the market to do the market research, including the segmentation of the potential market and what is really out of this segment, the market that needs to be addressed. We also do an institutional assessment, really study and look at the institution from all sides to identify what are the gaps that would need to be closed if this entity would like to deliver financial services to refugees. So HR can be a big gap. Digitalization comes up also a lot. Access to this, to the population, like physical access, comes also as something that a challenge. Based on these two, so knowing better the institution and knowing better the market, we help them to, or they develop an outreach strategy that cover not only the products, what I was mentioning, okay, if it is a loan, what is it? Are we going to create a fully new loan, or are we adapting something that we already have, perhaps just the marketing of it, but also what other products do they need and how should they look like? The communication strategy, extremely important, how you communicate internally within the institution, but also externally towards clients, towards partners, and so on and so forth. Delivery channels, so digital comes out a lot, but also are we using agents? Are we creating a new branch into the camp? And the relationship strategy with clients, with partners, and internally as well. So the last bit is the pilot testing and the outreach strategy rollout plan. So we test in a small, as all FSPs do. So you have a new product, you have your whole strategy, you test it, you pilot test it, and then if things are fine or not, you include whatever learnings from your the pilot test, and then hopefully expand. So this was the part on the supply. Very quickly on the demand, I don't have a lot of time. We have a financial education program at the ILO, and we have added lately specific, sub-program for refugees and host communities. So we have a program for the Middle East and another program for East Africa. And we look not only at the curriculum and at the rollout and training multipliers, but also we have a certification process. We have an e-learning and online training. We have also a training for policymakers. We have discussed about it yesterday about policymakers. So it is all around financial education, really providing refugees and host communities with the tools to understand risks and to choose the financial services that they want to use. So that's all. Thank you very much. So I leave it back to you or to Annelien. Yes.
Thank you so much. That was really on timing, so thank you. Okay, so now after we've seen a lot of what ILO is doing these days, I would like to hand over the floor to my colleague Annelien, and then she will show you what we can do on the ground when we have enough support to collect data, and also when we can apply real-life solutions to this data.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Daphne, for the introduction. So hi, so I'm Annelien. I'm working in a policy and advocacy team of the International Rescue Committee, really focusing on economic well-being of crisis-affected and displaced populations. Oh, we lost the... Okay. Did I do something? Okay. So, so I'm going to focus on a research that we did in collaboration with two universities, the Tufts University and the Catholic University in Germany, with support from the BMZ and GIZ as well, which we already 2 years ago, when we had some initial findings from that research, we were already here at the EMW to present it. And it really focused on basically the financial lives of refugees and how they want to use or access financial services, etc. And so this was a research that really interviewed hundreds of refugees in 4 countries, Kenya, Uganda, Jordan, and Mexico. And I'm going to touch very briefly on some high-level findings that we used to then implement pilot programs in Uganda, which I will talk about as well in a bit more detail. So one key outcome from this research was that financial services are really not sufficient, are not the only way to achieve financial health for refugees. So we see that their demand for financial services only grows once they achieve a certain level of stable livelihoods. And so what is really important as well is this foundational level of rights. So their access to work, their freedom of movement, etc. If those are not guaranteed, it's very hard for them to reach a sufficient level where they have a demand for various financial services. Though even from the start, there are certain financial services that would be of interest to them. I'm going to look at some of the recommendations from that research specifically for humanitarian and development practitioners like the IRC, which we then used to implement our pilot programs. Of course, there's much more detail and a lot of other recommendations in the research that we can share the link with you afterwards as well. So some of the main recommendations here were, so financial inclusion must really go beyond just the provision of these financial services, but should combine, for example, financial literacy training with more vocational and technical training to facilitate job access, etc. And then as well, the importance of social networks and cross-cultural exchanges between refugees and the host community is very important. Sharing information, facilitating access to financial services. And then we also saw that in particular for women, it's very important to sort of support their business skills, to raise their confidence, and also this support for social networks. As we see for women, it's often even more difficult to build these kind of connections in a new community, etc. And for example, in the FIND research, we found that women respondents who had limited social networks also had the lowest income, so it's really an important factor. So then moving into the pilots. So again, I'm going to go very briefly to the top findings, but you can find more details in the brief itself. So we did one rural and one urban pilot. So the rural pilot in Yumbe in Uganda and then one in Kampala. So obviously in the rural areas, access to land for refugees was the key issue, although we did see that there was underutilized land from the host community, so there was some opportunity there. And then, of course, in the urban settings, it's more the issues around right to work. Even though in Uganda there's quite a positive legal framework, in practice it's still quite difficult for refugees to get sort of stable jobs. So how can basically NGOs make sure that their trainings and apprenticeships are really fit for purpose for refugees? So what we did in Kampala then was to create a new model of apprenticeship where we combined financial literacy training with business grants to support refugees. And then we also encourage clients to self-select their mentor in an apprenticeship. And of course, we help them if they didn't find them themselves. But so this made that over half of the refugees actually had a Ugandan mentor. So this is again to kind of stimulate the exchanges and the social networks that they have. Then in the rural pilot, we formed sort of groups of farmers. So we did sort of group-based services with, again, a mix of refugees and hosts as the beneficiaries. And then again, we combined financial literacy training with training on good agricultural practices, etc., as well as connecting them to one of the major oilseed companies in Uganda to help them sort of grow the business, etc. So I'm going to go very top line over some of the findings. Yes, so this on the study design, just quickly to say that in Kampala we did focus almost only on women, and in the rural pilot also women were in the majority of our beneficiaries. So yeah, these are some of the things that we look at, but I'll explain in a bit more detail. So again, going to Kampala, to the urban setting, we did see that this intervention of apprenticeship and financial education increased the confidence scores for technical skills, financial literacy, business, as well as an ability for people to make informed decisions. As well as, importantly, people, and in particular refugees, agreed that their professional professional social network provides them with enough support. So there was an increase in refugees stating that they did have enough support from their current networks, as well as that they actually know most of the professional in their area that are Ugandans. So kind of increasing again this networking and sort of connections that are really helpful for them to then grow the business. I'm not going to go into the rest here. And then, so on the rural pilot, we looked at income, for example. We did see that the average income of the clients increased with the pilot. And importantly, also their access to financial services. So banks, as well as microfinance institutions, we saw a significant increase in access and use of those services. Though overall, it still remained quite low, both for hosts and refugees. And then for mobile money, we didn't see a significant increase because the use was already kind of high in Uganda for that group. Yeah, so very briefly as well, again, in the rural pilot, we did also have an increase in sort of support, financial support and business networks as well that we saw from the pilot. So that was also a positive result. And there's more results on social cohesion, etc., in the brief that I won't have time to go into. So then I just want to end with some recommendations that came out of our pilots and the broader FIND research. So obviously for practitioners like humanitarian and development NGOs, we do see the potential of this group-based livelihoods provision with a mix of refugees and hosts. We did see definitely the benefits of that from the pilot, so that's something we would recommend. And then for financial services providers, so on the sort of supply side, as Yusra was explaining, we see that it would be important for, and as they're also doing with the ILO, to really collaborate with humanitarian and other international organizations that know more about the refugee population to really tailor products to the needs, for example, around translation of certain products, as well as reduced fees, because we do see high fees for a service could still really be a barrier for some refugees as well as vulnerable hosts. And then for rural settings in particular, as we saw, sort of overall usage was still quite low. It remains important to really train people around the available services, etc., and facilitate that access as well. And then the last point is a point related to the legal and the policy environment as well that Yusra touched upon, and I know Mariam will also speak more about. So, which is that in certain countries like Uganda, there is an official authorization to use, for example, refugee IDs to access a service. But that doesn't mean that banks always consistently implement that across all their branches or are aware that they're able to do that. So that's a recommendation also for the financial service providers to make sure that they do consistently implement these policies throughout their branches. And then very quickly, for donors, I mean, we see it's definitely important, again, to have this multi-year flexible type funding so that we can do this research as well as then test and implement pilots to then be able to scale up at a later stage. So that's an important one. And again, on the policy side, as we mentioned, it's important that policymakers also help provide this information to refugees and hosts, as well as things they can do to also strengthen social networks and strengthen these exchanges between refugees and hosts. And then importantly, as I mentioned before, to provide very clear guidance to financial service providers on the rules and regulations around access and use of identification for refugees. So that was, yeah, very brief and very quick, but I'm happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Annalene. It was brilliant. And we folks at IRC, we love acronyms. So Finance and Displacement Research, we call FIND, and it actually gave us a lot of findings as well. So now we're moving on. And my colleague Matthias, who is in Jordan, he will highlight the results of another pilot and another kind of research as well that they did, mixing digitalization and financial inclusion. Matthias, we see you on the screen. so don't worry about it. And I'm going to take care of your slides. So the floor is yours, and have fun.
Thank you very much. Most important question the last 2 years. I hope you can hear me. And okay, if I hear nothing else, then I will just move on. Thank you for having me. And also I want to say thank you to the FIND research, which really gave great insights to us as well. And yeah, helped us directing the work we're doing here in Jordan in the right direction. Okay, we start. So I work in Jordan for the GIZ in the project. It's called Digitenses. It stands for Digital Remittances. And we're trying to improve access to remittances and other financial services through digital solutions. And the main objective is so I'm going to tell you shortly about the project and what we're generally doing. And then I go into the more specific activities. Yeah, so our target groups are threefold. We work with Jordanians, we work with Syrian refugees, and we work with migrant workers. And through all of these target groups, we aim to reach at least 50% of women. Next slide, please. Yeah, why are we using the mobile wallet to increase financial inclusion? Well, I guess most of you know, but for those who don't, a mobile wallet is a virtual account that you can register with using your mobile phone. And so through your mobile phone, then you can make virtual transactions, receive funds, send funds, and store money. It's very easy to use, it's fast, it's available all around the clock, and most importantly, it's available for refugees here in Jordan, which is not the case for bank accounts. And yeah, it has a lot of advantages, and all these advantages are especially true for women. Next slide, please. The general approach of the project is also threefold. So we work in 3 areas. The first one is we work with the supply side, so with private sector partners in order to create a sound service. In the second intervention area, we work with the Central Bank of Jordan, which is our political partner, to create a functional regulatory framework. And in the third intervention area, we work with the end users on awareness raising and financial literacy training. And in the middle, it comes all together because we also support the central bank in facilitating exchange formats between private and public. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah, we're working since 2016, and there have been good achievements. The DFS ecosystem, the digital financial service ecosystem, is growing. So we have around 2 million wallets registered in Jordan. Cross-border remittances through the mobile wallet are permitted and live by a couple of service providers. And of course, refugees and Jordanians use the mobile wallet actively. And so far, we have a 30% women. And so in 2020, our project got prolonged. And so we were thinking, okay, the ecosystem is generally in a good position. So what can we focus on? And we thought that especially refugees and women are still not using the wallet in the amount that might be desired. So their financial inclusion is not where we might want them to be. And so we decided to focus on them. And then our first ideas were, okay, do we know enough about the target group? So we ask ourselves, who are we working with? Who is the target group and where is the target group? And that's why we did some interesting activities that I would like to present you today. Next slide, please. And just also for an overview, we're working, the topic of financial inclusion of women and refugees spans through all of these intervention areas, which I will go over in detail in the next slide, please. So, for example, in intervention area 1, as I said, we wanted to know, okay, who are we working with? Who is the target group and what are their needs? And so we did work with a consultant to do a user journey and user experience research. So we wanted to know from opening the wallet, interacting with agents, using the wallet for any services, what is the perception of the target group, refugees and women, where are bottlenecks, where are challenges, what could be improved. And so, we did kind of a new approach of like a design thinking, interactive, interactive approach. So we did a lot of focus group discussions, got the results, came back, presented to the refugees again, got their feedback. And so through this learning, we created 10, or the consultant created 10 services that could potentially be implemented as a service in the mobile wallet, so that there's a useful service, or more useful service for the refugees to use. And one, for example, is the e-wallet ambassador, so that the female or the refugee gets picked in a certain area, and in this area she gets trained and she can support her peers on opening the wallet, if there are issues, helping, and through this gain a little bit of an income. So we learned a lot about what are their needs, and out of this research we start piloting these new services with the private sector. And on the other side, which is not on the slide here, but we did a geospatial analysis where we put together, we worked with UNHCR, who gave us the geo-local position of the refugees that receive funds through the mobile wallet, and we put on top the financial infrastructure for mobile wallets that we received from the central bank. And then we could kind of on a heat map see, okay, where are a lot of refugees that use the mobile wallet, but there's not a good representation of infrastructure. And we shared this with the partners and the central bank to make improvements. The next slide, please. And here, for example, on the intervention area 2, we are, as I said, working with the central bank and trying to create dialogue and discussion between the different actors in the sector. We work in particular concerning refugees and women, for example, on the infrastructure in camps, which is challenging. For example, that merchants accept digital payments, that there's a sufficient network of agents where you can cash in, cash out, ATMs, things like this, especially inside the camps, are sometimes challenging. And in the third intervention area, we are working, as I said, on training and awareness. Some numbers, for example, that we ourselves have trained more than 17,000 women, and we are doing training of trainers for partners from other humanitarian organizations or non-governmental organizations, so that they can train the women and refugees in financial literacy as well. And also out of the research from the user experience study, we are overhauling and creating a totally new set of training materials that is much more tailored towards the needs of different target groups, which is very exciting as well. And we also thought not about only the content of the training, but also how is the training delivered, because it shows maybe that the old classroom model PowerPoint presentation in front of 20 people is not the most effective learning tool. So we also here want to be more digital, but the final product is not there yet. We're still in the process of doing this. And on the last slide, please, I want to end on a high note with a success story. This is Hannah. She's a Syrian refugee. She lives outside of Amman in a small town, also outside of camp in a host community with a husband and 4 children. And the story is that she and her husband have a small home-based business where they produce prayer mats and little lamps and things like this. And she used to sell this in her neighborhood using cash or using a platform called Schubfan. But there were always issues and she couldn't really receive the money. And of course, the customer base is limited in the community. And then she recognized the mobile wallet and she started using it and markets her products on social media like Facebook and Instagram, which provides her with a much broader customer base, and she has the opportunity to receive the money digitally, which makes it much more easy for her to buy and sell her goods. And her quote is, "The mobile wallet allows me to receive my payments and settle bills easy and quickly, and I've solved a lot of time and awkward conversation about money with strangers," which makes her feel much more independent. Isn't this beautiful? We have also produced a video that shows her case, yeah, and I think this link will be posted here as well. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the questions later.
Thank you, Matthias, for having time in your agenda and dialing in to join us today. Please stay on because we're probably going to have very interesting questions in a moment. And now for our audience, so far we have talked about, in IRC we call the refugees our clients. So we have talked about our clients' needs, the implementations of solutions via cooperation agencies or by civil society. But there's also an element that is very important for this ecosystem to work. And these are central banks, because they really are the ones that can influence directives and observe policies that can accommodate the needs of the displaced persons. So my colleague Marian from AFI will now tell you how.
Thanks a lot for that introduction, Daphne, and also providing the rationale for my presentation. Good morning, I'm Mariam. I currently oversee the work on the financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons at the Alliance for Financial Inclusion, or AFI. Just in case you are not aware of us, AFI, we are a network of nearly 80 member institutions who are comprised of financial policymakers and regulators. So like Daphne said, central banks, but also ministries of finance. So I'm here to bring in the policy and regulatory perspective when it comes to advancing financial inclusion for forcibly displaced persons. As you've heard in Yusra's and Anneline's presentations, they did allude to the important role that policymakers and regulators, especially financial policymakers and regulators, can play in ensuring access to and usage of formal financial services by forcibly displaced persons. If we go to the next slide, please. So I'd like to share how we've worked with some of our central bank member institutions in implementing the roadmap that Daphne mentioned in the beginning of the session at the country level. So AFI was also quite involved in the formulation of this roadmap. We got some of our member institutions to share their experiences and their perception of their role in advancing the financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons. So it became quite clear that their role is very critical in all 6 clusters that the roadmap presents by way of recommendations. So you see here those 6, and I hope in the next slide, I can show you how we tried to implement those in some of our member countries. So what we found in the very beginning is that national financial inclusion strategies of our member institutions would be quite a good and helpful entry point for us to get the central banks to understand that they have quite an important role to play in this regard, and that they would need to use these strategies to communicate to their regulated entities or the financial service providers that they do have obligation to offer formal financial services to the forcibly displaced. National financial inclusion strategies are just like any other national strategies. Yusra also mentioned national financial education strategies, but we were focusing on the broader national financial inclusion strategy because within the AFI network, we found that these are very effective policy tools that the central bank can use to ensure that the national financial inclusion efforts are quite targeted, coordinated with different stakeholders, measured also, and also aligned with other national policy agendas, such as in this case, it would be important for the national financial inclusion strategy to be aligned with a national forced displacement strategy or refugee assistance strategy. But quite early on, we faced serious challenges related to data, coordination, and also digital financial literacy. Now, data was a really serious issue because we noticed that there was absolutely no data on FDP financial inclusion. So the financial policymaker had no basis to design or devise any policies. And any data that was available on financial inclusion was quite on the surface, and the main stakeholder we found to hold such data was humanitarian stakeholders, but they weren't the exact data we needed to be able to change policy in a way that FDPs can be included. So coordination was also very key, a key challenge, because the central bank, first of all, did not really appreciate their role in advancing FDP financial inclusion. So we managed to change that mindset. But also they didn't coordinate very well with the line ministry dealing with forced displacement or the humanitarian stakeholders in this regard. So I'll also show you later on some country experiences with how we dealt with that. Digital financial literacy was also another challenge because we found forcibly displaced persons were quite left out of the digital financial services strategies and initiatives that the central banks were taking forward. So we look at that, so they've adopted DFS strategies and initiatives and policies, but the FDPs were missing from those. So if we go to the next slide. While we were implementing those recommendations from the roadmap at the country level, we also thought it would be useful to capture some of the implementation challenges that we encountered along the way. And this was very difficult to put together, but at last we launched it at our annual meetings in Jordan a couple of months ago. And at every stage of the policy cycle, we captured all the specific challenges that central banks were facing, and then we tried to use this policy framework that we put together to address those challenges. So the objective is to provide guidance to our members. So it's a very policy maker specific, but I think it's also useful for any implementing partners to have a look, to also understand the headspace of the financial regulator, policymaker that you are dealing with. And it builds on the roadmap, and then also tries to complement some of its recommendations. If we go to the next slide, please. It starts with some initial policy considerations. So along the way, and as we started our journeys with the member institutions, there were a lot of question marks and blanks. So, and every country is so different. But in every country we say, so the first thing you should ask is who exactly a forcibly displaced person is. Is it a refugee that you want to target? Is it an internally displaced person? Or is it an asylum seeker who hasn't even gotten a refugee ID? Why this is so important is to a policymaker is it'll help them first understand the heterogeneous market segment and also the legal and implications of the identities of those market segments. So a refugee and their legal status versus an asylum seeker's legal status would have different legal implications and different ways in which they need to overcome challenges in access. The second one, and I like that Annalene also spoke to it at quite great length, is the foundational rights and the legality of for FDPs. So this is, it will form the basis of any financial inclusion policy and regulation that you want to use to advance financial inclusion for FDPs, because without these foundational and legal rights, those things cannot happen. So again, I hope to illustrate that better to you in the next slide also. And the final policy consideration that we saw was important to take into account was balancing risks and benefits. So this is to do with the anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism regulatory framework at the country level. So we found that this has this presents a huge barrier at the country level because it dictates the type of tiered know your customer or customer due diligence frameworks that the country would adopt and the regulated entity or financial service provider would adopt in order to provide access to formal finance for FDPs. So these AML-CFT regulations can be quite prohibitive. For example, if in the policy and regulation, proof of address is needed, this is definitely not a KYC requirement that a refugee who lives in a camp can satisfy. So these are some of the barriers that we were grappling with and still are, unfortunately. Yeah, we captured this as one of the initial policy considerations that the central bank should take into account. And if we can go to the next slide. The policy framework presents 4 pillars. So like I said, each pillar is responding to a specific challenge in the policy cycle. And we didn't make these challenges up. We really faced it in real time, and it was really stressful. These were things that we encountered over the last couple of years. The first one is to do with promotion. So we're responding to the challenge that refugees are still very much an invisible economy. They're absent in national census. The line ministry dealing with FDPs usually do not have an economic inclusion, and of course not even a financial inclusion element to their work, so that's very tough as well. And if you look at something like the Global Findex, you don't see FDPs there at all. And if you look at the UNHCR and their joint data center with the World Bank, that data on financial inclusion is also very limited. So this is something so real at the country level. And coordination is also, like I said, a problem that we face. So if we go to the next slide. The next slide is to do with access. So we look at the provision of access. This was when we faced those AML-CFT barriers at the country level. So even if there's flexibilities in the policy and regulations, so they say, look, if a refugee has a UNHCR ID, they can use that to satisfy KYC and CDD requirements and access a mobile money account. Okay, so the mobile service providers will do that. But the financial service providers will not really use this flexibility, and it's very rare. It's because they're worried they'll get fines because of non-compliance with the regulations, or the policymaker is not providing enough regulatory clarity or incentive to the financial service provider to leverage those flexibilities. So go next. So then we look at usage. You have access, and when we come to more advanced AFI member countries, they're already looking at enhancing usage beyond access. So a refugee can have maybe an entry-level bank account or mobile money, but are they really using it to enhance their livelihoods? Are they using it to save? And also, are we going beyond just cash-based one-off assistance to more meaningful financial inclusion where refugees can also use financial products the way we do? So if we go to the next slide. So the fourth pillar is to do with sustainability. So after access and usage, how do we extend this to ensure that refugees can enhance their financial health? So this is what Annalyn was talking about also earlier, financial health. Financial inclusion won't really mean anything if they don't have financial health, or if they can't save or improve their livelihoods, get jobs, just have a life like we do. So we are trying to, this is still premature in the eyes of financial policymakers and regulators. We're trying to evolve this concept a little bit more. But how we're doing this is also, if there's a national mainstream policies for financial health, how do we integrate FDPs into that? So if we go to the next slide. Okay, we don't have time to do the country spotlighting, but I just wanted to maybe look at Rwanda real quick. Their NFIS was very silent on the issue of refugees at the very beginning. We found that quite early, thankfully. And then we started to conduct a diagnostic study. And this was done in collaboration with UNHCR. And I like this story because the central bank said to us, we want to go to the refugee camp and we want to interact with refugees ourselves. And I thought that was a very special experience, and they managed to collect qualitative data for their policy making as well. So if we go to the next slide, I'll give them 1 more minute. And Eswatini is quite special. I just want to highlight that they're conducting money laundering, terrorist financing, and proliferation financing risk assessment specifically on forcibly displaced persons. This is, has never been done before, and it's been quite a challenging journey just because it's so new and we're not doing it perfectly, but it's really going to help with the issue of the tiered KYC and CDD in the country later on. So just some reflections. Sex and age disaggregated data, which is very important for policymaking, still very absent. So we would urge implementing partners to come forth and talk to your financial regulator and policymaker more and engage with them and tell them what kind of data you need and how they can use that for their policy making, but also in a way that they can protect the data and privacy of refugees. There's also really a lot of friction between FSPs and regulators, and that's, you know, I've been in workshops where they're shouting at each other because they don't have clear mandates. The bank or microfinance institution will be telling the central bank that they're not giving enough guidance or incentives. So that's also something that I would recommend to be an important way forward. So go next slide. But for future opportunities, I want to conclude with these. So we have the challenges, we have some recommendations, but what do we want to see in the future? One, we talked about foundational legal rights that would be very essential for FDP financial inclusion policy and regulation. So we're looking at asking the central bank to have more serious conversations with their Ministry for Labor, Ministry for Education, just to get those legal rights there. Also, the portability and sustainability of solutions. We have protracted refugee situations, but we also have situations of resettlement or repatriation. What happens when a refugee in Rwanda returns to Burundi? So we're looking at how do we ensure these things can be carried forward to the next stage. So sorry I went over time. Thank you so much for your attention. And I hope we have time for some questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Marianne. That was a ride, indeed. But the audience was really keen on listening to you. I could notice that. So we still have a few minutes. We would like to start with online participants, but so far we don't have questions. So if anyone from the audience here with us would like to start, please raise your hand. Or comment, question, more explanation. Yes. So yeah.
Thank you. Tidhar from Better Than Cash Alliance. A quick question to Yusra and for Mariam, just to know which countries were you implementing these two initiatives? And then Matthias was very honest when he finished by saying that classroom digital literacy programs did not work. So wonder if any of you has evidence of digital literacy programs that do work. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll take the first question. I think the digital financial literacy one, my colleagues will be, they have some great success stories that we copy from. But we're working in Rwanda, Eswatini, and Mauritania. And we're also starting in Malawi, Nigeria, and helping out, trying to help out Iraq as well.
For us, we are implementing the three-level approach in Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Sudan, and Lebanon and Iraq.
See you there.
Matthias,
Yeah.
would you like to complement?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a solution. I think regarding the financial literacy training, I think, yeah, it's if you just, yeah, as I said, put them in a room and give a presentation for 2 hours, that goes in many cases in 1 ear in and the other out. So I think it needs to be maybe more practical. And what we also heard might be very helpful is follow up with, once you have then used it, have the opportunity to have a session again. And of course, if it's in somehow possible, in some way possible, to use digital ways to do that, like online courses or classrooms or people you can reach out to and speak to online, makes it easier as well, so you don't have to travel somewhere to meet in a classroom.
Yeah, and maybe if I can just add to that on the financial literacy training. So I'm not a technical expert on sort of how we do our programming because I'm on the policy side, but I know that our technical teams working on how to provide this kind of training have guidance and definitely learnings from our programs on how to do that well. So I can definitely look that up and share with you, Tidhar.
Thank you all. There was another question at the back.
Yeah, actually, I've got a bunch of questions. Maybe some will take over coffee, but no, thanks. A really great presentation. So I'm with you in CDF. We have a migration program and remittances. So it's economic migrants. So it may include refugees, but it's a broader. But a couple of questions. So one is on the data gap, because we have the same on remittances for that matter. So right now we're working with transaction data of remittance companies. But I wonder how we can address this issue, because it's not in Findex, hardly in FinScope, hardly in Intermedia, and we can keep on making policies without refugees in mind, but that's going to be a bit tricky. So I wonder, social media, we tried that, but there's a lot of, we tried in Myanmar, you can imagine there's a lot of like bad stuff on Facebook, for example, so it's really, really hard to get that. But that'd be a question how we could, maybe for Mariam. And then the other question, maybe also for Mariam, is with the central banks and the financial service providers. So we've seen often there's a lot of, there's one thing is the strategy, but the other one is sort of getting the financial institutions to understand what that strategy is. Sometimes if you speak to 4 financial institutions, 4 microfinance institutions, they have different views on what they can do within the given regulations. Payment service provider, remittance service provider, same. So it'd be interesting if you have a best practice of sort of where there is a good dialogue rather than a shouting one, perhaps, that you mentioned. And then last one is maybe to Anneleen or Yusuf. So Anneleen would be really interested on the Uganda study. I didn't really get, so you said that there was an increase in bank usage, but not in mobile money. So I'd be interested to know if these cash transfers are digital. And why not an increase in mobile money usage, but there is an increase in bank usage? And the last thing is maybe related or slightly broader. What would you see be the major difference between economic migrants and refugees, if you like, in terms of tweaking a product and service so it can actually be adopted? Anyway, a whole range of...
Well, thanks for the questions. We're very thankful. I was worried there weren't going to be any. So just on the issue of data, unfortunately, we don't have much transactional data because they're not really that, or if they have access, they're not always using their the financial services. So in our diagnostic studies, we're looking at demand-side data. So in Eswatini, for example, we're working with Finmark Trust. So it's the first time they're covering FDPs. And that's where, we're looking at the demand-side gaps. But on the supply side, we're just getting normal data from the banks, microfinance institutions, and mobile financial services. But it's not very sophisticated data, I will tell you that. And we're also conducting that risk assessment. Unfortunately, there's, again, not much data, really. So what we're doing is we're going to the field, we're talking to the banks, but we're also trying to use the data from the UNHCR database in all the countries. Of course, there's been a lot of data coordination issues. It's not easy to have access to that database. So that's how we're handling the data gap. On putting policy, like a policy is only as good as its implementation. And this is really the case here. I would say in Rwanda, that was a very good success story. The first workshop, there was a lot of drama. They were shouting at each other. But then we put them into groups, and the central bank really took the driver's seat. So they said, look, we're here, we care about this population. This is some preliminary data. This is potential business cases for you. And this is our vision. So it's very important to have a central bank that has a very strong vision for how they see refugee financial inclusion and what that could lead to, how that connects to everything else, but also to communicate this vision, but how does that vision get implemented? So we say, we have this vision, what is your role as a bank, as an MFI, as an insurance provider? So for example, in Rwanda, at first, our consultants didn't understand why we wanted to look at the use of insurance and pension products by refugees. But the vision of the regulator is that they're here for the long term. So we do want to offer them insurance products. But then the insurance providers were asking, but what kind of market is that? They're not going to be a viable market segment. So that dialogue had to happen. We had so many workshops to handle that. I also want to hear from Annalene about that, why there's more inclusion in bank accounts and not mobile money, because in Rwanda, it was the opposite. Really high financial inclusion among refugees, but when we unpacked it, it was only because of mobile wallets. So not really using bank accounts. Thanks.
Yeah, so on that question, so actually most of the reason is because the mobile money use was already high, so people already knew and were using the service. So our particular intervention didn't significantly increase that even further. But for banks and microfinance institutions, it was really low and limited. And so the fact that we worked in this rural population to give them financial literacy training on what's available and try to connect them to these services, as well as the fact that they were increasing their income generation through being connected to this oilseed company. This helped sort of raise the demand also for these types of loans and banks services in a way. And so just to be clear, so the cash support we only did in Kampala in the urban setting, but in the rural setting it was just sort of the training and sort of training on agriculture and then the financial education part of it. So that's also the reason. In Kampala, so actually I would have to double check how that business grant was done, but I know as IRC we often really try to use the digital services, but I would have to check for this particular one.
Okay, we have 2 minutes, so please make it a really, really quick question.
Thank you. Maybe just following up on the remittance question, I was curious, I didn't see anything about remittance players or money coming in to either a bank account or a wallet that could help with livelihoods or a source of income for refugees from families abroad. If you could comment, is it because there's no data? I mean, in the dialogues that you have, is the remittance piece even important for refugees? Thank you.
for people on the audience or online audience, this is our last question because we ran out of time already, actually. And if you are here in person, please follow us and look for us during the coffee breaks.
Okay, I couldn't really hear you well. So are you asking if there is a remittance piece and how are we looking at sources of income? Okay, that's a really good question because in the demand side surveys, we're hearing from refugees also that one of the other barriers to gaining access to financial services is lack of income. So they have they perceive that they have not enough income and they cannot pay for fees, So thank you for raising the question. The remittance piece is important, but in the populations, at least that we're working with, the refugees, they're not really remitting yet. So. Receiving. Okay. Yeah, we did not. Oh no, we did actually have that piece, but we didn't analyze it as much. Really, we were looking at more how they're using it and not receiving yet, because I think that's really important for the risk management and financial resilience piece for refugees. How do they receive money, use that to save, and also use that to, in cases of emergencies? But we didn't get that far. It's still quite elementary. We're looking at more like access, lack of education, that kind of thing.
May I add to this question?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Yes.
Of course, I forgot that he's
You're-
so much
you-
better place to answer.
You're gonna close our session, Matthias.
Okay, then I will be very quickly. I mean, I don't have much data as well, but we, since the remittances is possible through mobile wallets since last year, we did some actual testing. So we did send money through 5 different continents with 3 different services: bank account, mobile wallet, and cash at exchange house. And what turned out to be the fastest method was the mobile wallet, and in almost all cases it was also the cheapest. And on average, it was the closest to the SDG goal of 3% cost of sending. So we were happy with this because that is the basic, that was the theory behind getting remittances digitalized. We see from data from the system operator that the amount that is received by refugees through mobile wallet is increasing, but there is a lot of potential for improvement. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthias. And yes, we really ran out of time, so it means that I'm sure you all enjoyed the session. And our last key takeaway is let's always collaborate and cooperate, because then we can have more business cases as well, like these. These are all IRC pictures, by the way, with our projects. And come talk to us. We'll all be here. We'll be available. And if there's a funder in the room that wants to fund us looking for data, please look for us as well, because we really need to find data. Thank you so much.